And I remember during that time of transitioning from corporate world to vocational ministry is that I didn't do it alone. And from that council, those people that were around me, the pastor that I was under his leadership at the time, they're all a part of it. Transitioning and making a decision, not only praying, as you said, Pastor Danny, but also all these other folks praying as well, praying with me. I was not alone in that next step, so therefore the fear was gone.
Hey guys, in celebration of our 50th episode, we're having our first ever contest. And it's not just any contest, it's a giveaway. And it's not just any giveaway, valued up to $1,000. Now we're gonna announce the winner at our Sunday night live stream, 6 p.m. Sunday night, February the 18th. We're giving away 2 nights at any Marriott branded hotel up to $1,000, because February is Valentine's month. It's going to be incredible. All the information is in the link below. Be sure and sign up today. Hey guys, welcome to the Troy Gramling podcast. I am so glad to get to hang out with you today because we talk to interesting people every single week. But today I actually get to talk to friends. And we're going to talk about a subject, I don't know, maybe you've never thought of it. I know a lot of people do. We get a lot of questions when it comes to this. Now, I want to remind you, if you haven't already subscribed, do that. Hey, why don't you share this with a friend? If you haven't looked at all our episodes, listen, we've talked to bakers. We've talked to healthcare professionals. We've talked to physicians. We've talked to professional athletes because they all have something to teach us about life. I've learned I'm becoming quite a wise person doing this podcast. I really am enjoying it. It's one of the favorite things I get to do, and also enjoy our ability to hang out. Today, I have my friends, Pastor Matt, Pastor Danny, and then I got a special guest I'll introduce to you a little bit later. Guys, welcome to the podcast.
It's great, Pastor. Great to be here.
Yes, it is. It's good to have those guys. Don't they look good? They got just almost matching outfits on.
And coordinated
jeans and those kind of things. But anyways, we're going to talk about the difference between what people might call ministry work or a professional pastor or whatever terminology and secular work, in the sense that you guys have both worked in the secular world, let's say, not as a part of a ministry as far as providing for your family. So let's start by just sharing us a little bit about what it was you did before you became a pastor.
Where do we start?
Well, I was a police officer for about 16 years, and I did a lot of different things in the police department. And the last several years of my career, I was an undercover detective. So I did a lot of undercover stuff like Miami Vice. And
you had long hair.
I had a longer beard. I had highlights in my hair. I looked like back in those days, like a skateboarder, surfer type of dude. And I did
right here. Hey, Giuseppe, who's helping us out with the podcast. Do you have a picture of Pastor Danny that we can put up on the screen?
I hope so. I want to see this.
I know he's got one that if you don't, we'll post it a little bit later.
I do got some pictures, but it was a completely different world. I mean, it was, law enforcement. You talk about the book, the law, keep upholding the law, justice, or helping keep order. And I did that for many years. I know it was a different type of lifestyle. It affected or impacted my family in a different way. But I'm sure that a lot of those years and experience helped me to where I'm at now.
How long were you an officer?
16 years.
And what did you go straight from school, or did you do something before that?
No, so I did some different jobs. I worked at Burger King and did some other smaller jobs. And then when I was 20, you got to put in, you got to take tests, and there's a lot of people that put in for thousands of people. And the cream of the crop makes it. And I was in the top. I have 200.
So you're saying you're the cream of the crop.
It depends on the cycle. But I guess I was either with a lot of not so good crop, and I made it up to the top. But I got selected. So actually, when I started the process when I was 20, and I turned 21, and I went through the entire process, and I got hired. And a month after I had turned 21, because you got to be 21 to be able to carry, at least back then, carry a gun. So I went to the police academy, and my last job before I got put into the academy was I worked for Xerox Corporation. Back in those days, Xerox had not only the machines and technicians, but they had accounts in a lot of like law firms and big. And I had an account in the Miami Herald building.
So Burger King, Xerox, and then an officer for, what'd you say, 16 years?
16 years.
What about you, Pastor Matt?
Before being called into vocational ministry, I was in the corporate environment for over a dozen years. The previous job that I had before becoming a pastor, I was a director of risk management for the largest pork producer actually in the world. And in that, my number one job was to increase shareholders' wealth. That was my focus. Anything that we could do to help lower our liabilities, to put money back into the shareholders' pocket, that was our success. So anywhere from property and casualty insurances, workers' compensation, general liability, all these different types of insurances was my responsibility.
Wow. And that would tell us the name of the company again?
The name of the company is Smithfield Foods. They're a hog production division, yeah.
Wow. So they make all kinds of food then?
Oh, yes. Actually, one out of every 4 pieces of bacon that is eaten in the country is coming from Smithfield.
Wow. You've eaten a lot of that.
I've eaten a lot of bacon. Probably more since I've lived here than anything.
Yeah. Oh, me. So, hey, we do have a special guest with us. I want you to meet in the waiting room. And so, Giuseppe, let's invite Pastor Frank into the conversation.
How you doing?
Yeah, we're doing well. It's good to have you. I guess, could you hear our conversation?
I did. It's pretty amazing that Pastor Matt ate so much bacon.
You know that's not pretty amazing. You know him better than that. Now tell us, I know you've had a unique journey that we want to talk about here in just a little bit, but tell us what you did before you felt the nudge into vocational ministry.
So I was a lawyer, still a practicing lawyer. It was my dream to found a law firm, and I did that in 1995. I launched out on my own right there in Broward County, about 20 minutes from Potential Church, and we had a successful law practice for 20 years. So we did that. And after we did that, we sold everything and we moved to Palm Beach County and we started a church. And then after that, we are in the preschool industry. So we operate Christian preschools inside of churches.
So now what before you became an attorney though, did you have any Burger King type jobs?
I actually, my third year of law school, I had 3 jobs. So I was a janitor, I was a car salesman, and I worked for legal aid.
Wow. Now, what kind of cars did you sell?
I sold Nissans.
Nissan.
I wasn't very good at it.
You're better at buying than you are selling.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, I've got 3 guys here. Myself, I planned on, I had jobs, like I worked at Sears and those kind of things, but I really didn't have a career right as I was getting ready to go into coaching. I actually got an offer and got an offer to play basketball in Amsterdam, I think. And then I got offered to coach, but felt called to do ministry. And I think God, kind of does things that way where you're sure of what he's doing in your life. But I never, had to make that transition and, take that risk. And let me ask you guys, and then we'll go to Pastor Frank, because he started a church, which is a little different than joining a team. Because a little, if you're starting the church, you're a decision maker. When you're joining a team, you're always joining a team. You're a part of a team. So how long did you wrestle with, is God, did you feel called to pastor or to minister? Because words mean different things to different people, so it's kind of hard sometimes. But before you sensed, oh, wow, this might be vocationally. In other words, did you feel a part, whether it's a pastor or serving in that capacity, and then later the calling moved to vocation, or did it all? How did that work out? How long did you kind of? What's the wrestling like, or was there?
Well, I mean, it's very interesting that you would ask that question because I remember it vividly. It was in December, right before the Christmas holiday break. And I remember being in my office there in the headquarters, and I felt God nudging me into ministry. I did not know what that meant because where I'm from, either you're the preacher or you're the song leader. And I knew that I was not called to preach, but then also I knew that being the song leader was not going to be enough, I guess, resources to support me and 4 kids. And so I just began praying. I knew God wanted to do something with me, but he was, I guess, preparing me or had me in a position to prepare for what he wanted to do next. And I believe from mid-December up until March was that time of praying, Amy and I praying together until he actually revealed to me what that next step in ministry was going to be.
And what was that? Where did you go right off the bat?
I went to actually a Barefoot Church, now Valorous Church in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And they had a position they invited me to apply for, which was called an executive pastor. Pastor, I didn't even know what an executive pastor was. I had to go to Google and actually Google it. And it, of course, it was a person that dealt with the business, the finance, and staff of church. And where I'm from, we're small churches, 100 people. But at the time, that church was over 2,000 people. So I'd never been to a big church before, didn't know what it looked like or what have you, but went and visited with that great group down there in Myrtle Beach, Pastor Clay and his team. And they brought me in as their executive pastor.
So did they come to you, or did you already feel called and go to them?
Well, what occurred was one weekend, because I was serving in volunteer ministry at the church where I was at, leading worship. And so I took the weekend off, and me and my family went to Myrtle Beach. If you're from that area, Myrtle Beach is the place to go. So we went there, and a mutual friend of mine and Pastor Clay's actually said, well, you should go to Barefoot Church and visit for the weekend. And I did that. And after Amy and I left the service, I texted our friend and said, hey, we're moving, just joking.
Right.
And then she replied, says, well, actually, we've been talking about you quite a bit, and we have an opening for an executive pastor and would love for you to think about that. I'm like, okay, what's an executive pastor?
Right.
But that put the next step to, again, seeing what God wanted to
So
do.
God was preparing you before even the opportunity.
Absolutely.
Stuff.
Absolutely. Because, again, in my mind, what I thought going into ministry looked like was totally different.
Right.
And so I knew that I didn't want to get ahead of God, but I wanted us to remain excited. So that's, I think, the time of that preparation, those 2-3 months.
Yeah, I think sometimes we get too specific. We worry too much about the details. I know for me, when I felt God's nudge into ministry, we were doing students. And I'll never forget, the pastor left, and so then they were talking to me about being, the lead pastor of this little church, and they're like, "Do you feel called to?" And I was like, "I feel nudged by God to vocationally do ministry, but I didn't have, like I'm gonna be a pastor or a youth pastor or I'm wrestling with, I want to be a coach. I'm wrestling with this nudge, not so much, exactly what I want to be, which is different for everybody, of course. What about you?
Man, there's a lot of similarities, but differences at the same time. I grew up single mother and only child, and I never thought being a pastor, working for a church in my life. Actually, I dreamt about being a police officer. I used to see the cops running around, and I got to do that. And, God's intention about even the preparation before that. But, I got plugged in. I spent years out of church, and, I got invited a lot of times to here. It was called Flamingo Road back in those days. And by folks that were coming here. And my wife and I was like, we got to find a home church. And our kids were small, and we came. And we connected right away as far as with the style of the church, with the pastor, which was you, already here. And I was back in 2005, 2006. And, we did what a lot of I guess I see folks do, which is they start sitting in the back, and they'll come through, once every couple of weeks. And then that turned into every week. That turned into answering one of those calls to action: serve, give, get baptized, all these different things. And I when I was a young kid, I went to a Pentecostal church, so I knew about God, Jesus. But adulthood, teenage years and adulthood, I kind of did life my way. So as we did those steps, I started serving. And backstage is one of the things I got plugged into. I also helped a little bit with security, and backstage was a thing. And built a team back there. We kind of reorganized. And when you're visible there, you know, some of the leaders that were here sort of invited me to book study or this or that, creative meetings. And I would say yes to all these things. And that progressively, you know, started making new relationships. And I remember I was backstage and I had that nudge that we hear about a lot, that nudge. And what it was for me, it was this burning desire and passion of wanting to be part of the team. And I remember arguing with God, it's like, but I am part of the team. But it was like different, like full time. Not necessarily, I didn't think of it vocational, but obviously full time means you can't do nothing else. And so I talked to my wife about it. We wrestled through that. I mean, you know, what does this mean? And I remember that some months passed, and then Pastor H and yourself went to lunch one day. And you probably not remember this. 2010, I think it was, Cheesecake Factory. Mm-hmm. And it was like a recruiting type conversation. And, but what I remember, you know, the authenticity of you, it's like, I came out of that conversation thinking you were scaring me away because you were telling me about all the hard work, the sacrifice, what is required of, the fact that the spouse and the family has to be part of the ministry, that this is not going to be walking like you're next to God on his throne, that is not all peachy, like the reality. And I was like, but, and then after that, another pastor called me, hey, I have an offer for you. And I was like, I couldn't believe it. I remember coming out of that meeting or that lunch, how funny God is. Because God, during that time, I know that I would not listen to anybody else asking me to join ministry. He knew there was a couple people in my life during that time, or voices that I would allow to speak into me. And he knew he could have asked, I don't know, another pastor here or some other ministry leader. I would have found out to listen. So that turned into, you know, one of the pastors, I think when the executive pastor might have been here, offered me a position. And it wasn't a pastor position. And I was like, I don't know. I mean, money, look at the money. It's like, I know what I make, all these different things. And my wife and I, for months, we prayed. We looked at our budget. We looked at our finances. We sought some wise counsel in our lives at that time. And it was, you know, we got some pushback from family. And, but I couldn't shake it off. And then, you know, I got a second offer, and then we nearly had to make a sacrifice. And God wanted me to trust. And ultimately, I made the decision. And now it's been almost 12 years, I think it is. And the decision was the right decision because the joy that has come and the impact and how God has used me, my family, to make a difference is so fulfilling, and there's joy into that. But, you know, I wrestled. And I want to say maybe about 6 months. Summer, 5 months, summer to November. I remember November is when I first, of 2011, I think it was.
Yeah.
It kicked off. But it's interesting because, you know, I didn't grow up in a pastor's home.
Right.
I didn't grow up, I don't know what that was, calling or any of that stuff. But that is a...
Well, you know, and I'm sure there's some folks as you're listening or even watching today, and one of the things you hear in both of these stories is not getting ahead of God, right? Because once God kind of nudges your heart about something, it's real easy to then try to make it happen. And you want to be ambitious and you want to dream big, but God's got you, you know, and that's one of the great things about being a believer is that, you know, God's going to get us to where he created us to go, and he created us to do something of significance, to be successful. Pastor Frank, I want to talk about the other side a little bit with you, and we'll come back, kind of talk about your beginning, but you know, and I got to really kind of walk along with you because you were here for several years and kind of went on that journey and then got to the point where God nudged your heart. And like you said, you guys kind of sold everything. And, you know, as an attorney, you were successful, so you had some resources, and you know you invested all those in launching this church. And then you're, I would say, kind of in a hybrid now, you know, in the sense that you're in the business world in these, but it's also ministry. It's kind of both. But let me ask you this: was the journey from pastoring to leading a business similar as the journey from being an attorney into ministry? In other words, we're both journeys similar as far as anxiety and questioning God and all of that, or were they different?
When I first started coming to church to what happened a few years later. So when I first started coming to Potential, like Pastor Danny, I had no church background, accepted Christ when I was 10 years old, and then walked away for 20 years. And so I came to church with my then girlfriend, who is now my wife, by the way. I can say that. And I said, hey, why don't we go to church on Saturday night? And she's like, what? Go to church on Saturday night? She's like, I go to church twice a year. What do you mean? And I just like, hey, I heard that it's pretty cool. It's fun. We can just hang out. I was just kind of like, I had to say something. So we came to church. We heard you, Pastor Troy, speak. And for me, I was hooked. You talked about destiny and leading a life of significance. And that was huge for me. So it was exciting for us to get involved in the church. I love big vision, to hear about vision. You talked about leadership. There was a team around you supporting that leadership. And I was drawn in. There was an excitement every Sunday. There was an anticipation every weekend. What were you going to say? What was going to happen next? And then I started to think, you know what? I can use these leadership principles in my law firm to grow my law firm. I can actually use what I'm hearing in the church and apply it to what I do for a living, and that's practice law. And it definitely helped my law firm, but it was exciting for us to be part of it, watch hundreds of people be saved, especially during Easter and Christmas, and going to the and silently wishing that I would be one of those people baptizing others. And God willing, in the next 5 years, we got a big vision too. That's our Florida 550 plan, to open up 50 neighborhood kid schools in churches across Florida. And if that sounds familiar, Pastor Troy, it should, because the vision for our schools was inspired by the vision that God Central Church.
Well, it's exciting to see, what you're doing. And of course, you're partnering with parents, and with churches. So, there's so much that's happening through what you're doing. When you decided to go in this direction, you could have stayed with the church plant. You could have looked for another church to pastor. You could have looked for another church staff to be on. I mean, you could have, come back here. What was it that you said, you know what, I need to go back to the business? Was it a sense of calling? Was it a step? And then as you did it, you thought, oh, wow, this is the right thing. Were you confident when you went back into the business world? What was that process like?
Yeah, so that was, we had a little church, and contrary to what people think, all pastors aren't rich. So, I needed to pay the bills. And so I'm like, man, I don't want to go back to law. I don't want to do that. I'm still a licensed attorney. I could do it anytime. I could do it today. But I didn't want to do that. I wanted to that honored God. And so I'm like, you know what? I am going to take the next step. We have these 2 schools, and I'm going to go all in on these 2 schools. And I think God honored that. A couple of years ago, I had lunch with Pastor Matt, and he looked at me and said something that I will never forget. Matt, you probably have no idea what it is, other than like, bro, you look good. You said, bro, you are a blessing to churches. And that stuck with me, that I can do what God's called me to do in the business world and be a blessing, not just to one, to many. And that has really been our why. Is, man, we want to come alongside churches, lift up the arms of the senior pastor and his wife and that leadership team, and be a blessing. It's now our mission. It's our vision to be a blessing to churches, to children, and to communities. So thank you, Pastor Matt, for just seeing that in me and speaking that over my life, because spiritual, you just saw something in me and you said it. And I do appreciate that.
Yeah, we celebrate with you where you're going. And I think of all the people that I've met in my goodness, some 3 decades of ministry, you're one of the most consistently generous people that I've ever met. And I don't think, if I had to say if there's anything that contributes to your success, you know, throughout your life and even restarting, I mean, redoing something totally different, I would attribute it to the fact that God is faithful to his word. And, you know, generosity leads us somewhere. And, you know, while leadership and your marriage, all those things are important, of course, but it's encouraging to see God be faithful in your life, knowing that you've lived that kind of life. So I appreciate you, and thanks so much for joining us today on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored. It was a lot of fun. Good to see you guys again, and look forward to joining you sometime.
Yeah, we'll have you back, especially once we get all the technology figured out. We're still learning. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
All right, bye-bye.
See ya.
Before we go, I wanted to just, I know that, you know, a lot of folks we're always trying to figure out God's plan for our lives, and what's to go left, what's to go right. What's the one thing that you would just encourage folks if maybe they're trying to figure out where to go to school, or whether they're called to ministry, or should they get married, or whatever? What have you learned through this process? You know, there's risk. There's lots of things that could have happened, you know, when you change vocations. Well, what advice would you guys give?
Well, I say for a believer, if you're a believer, it is to bring it to God, to pray, and trust. And I remember, you know, in my own life, that calling, and financially, just to say, financially, where I was in the career, didn't make sense. But the calling with the passion, the heart, and the direction that I was being led to by God was overpowering that, and God wanted me to trust him. Everything worked out. A year later, 2 years later, 3 years later, and now we look at 12 years after, and I look back and I say, wow, God was just wanting me to trust him. And I just say that, you know, if you're a believer, like I said, is pray, have faith, and trust. And in that process, you know, I had some folks in my life that were able to speak and help me in that process as well. But trust God.
You know, the church doesn't have a pension plan, but God does. Amen.
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 How about you, Pastor Matt?
For me, you know, I don't claim to be the smartest person, and I believe that's one of the reasons why God wanted people to be a part of a group of people. In other words, a local church. And I remember during that time of transitioning from corporate world to vocational ministry is that I didn't do it alone. And that what I did is for me and my family, we decided to weave our lives into the fabric of the church. And from that council, those people that were around me, the pastor that I was under his leadership at the time, they're all a part of it. And so with that, I was transitioning and making a decision, not only praying, as you said, Pastor Danny, but also all these other folks praying as well, praying with me, you know, on the journey with me. So I was not alone in that next step. So therefore, the fear was gone. Of course, it's, you know, you can be a little nervous about going to the next step because it's new, it's unfamiliar, but I was not fearful because there was a tribe of people walking it with me, and I could not have gotten that anywhere except for the local church. So I would recommend that to anyone that is wanting to hear from God about what nudges they're feeling at. If they're ingrained in their church, then they're not alone, and their tribe is going to be with them. But if they're not, get into a church quick. Get to learn the heart of your pastor, because to have your pastor praying for you, praying with you about what God wants to do in your life is so powerful. And I had learned that very early on, and that's something I treasure to this day.
Yeah, you know, that idea that one is too small a number for greatness. And I think the church is maligned, it's attacked, right? There's a lot of times that folks want to tear it apart and break it down, and it's not perfect. But at the same time, you think of all the organizations out there you could be a part of. Even if you take the spiritual aspect away, which of course is that's why we're here, and that's what makes such a huge difference. But even if you took that away, the community that's involved in the local church is of great value. I know that's not the stories you read, you hear abuse and all that stuff. But when you think about other organizations out there, you know, it's within the church that, like you guys were both saying, you know, that you find often the solutions to challenges and lifelong friends, spouses. All of our kids have met their spouse right here.
Yeah.
So it's a great place to check out. I'm glad you're here. We love having you on the program, but nothing like finding a community, and online and in person, so you can touch the people around you. But I want to thank you. Thanks for giving us your time, and I want to encourage you on your journey. You know what it is? You were created to do something great. Don't settle for anything less than that. Continue to pursue it. Take what risk you need to take. Listen to the folks of wisdom that God has placed into your life, and you might be surprised just what lies ahead. Hey, be sure, share. There's probably some folks that are trying to figure something out, and something that we said could be an encouragement to them. So be sure and share. Also, if you hit the like, leave a comment, let us know what you're thinking, and check out the past episodes. We've talked to a bunch of cool people along the way, and we will continue to do so in the future. So come back next Thursday. We'll be right here looking for you. God bless, and we'll see you next Thursday.